Well, Taylor, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast, man. This is episode 6 of the CEO Under 30 podcast. For those who don't know Taylor O'Connell, he's the owner of Top Tier Painting and Coatings. Started this company when you were 18 years old.
Young guy.
Yeah. Now they operate in 6 different states. They're growing, they're expanding. He's been doing this for 9 years now. I'm excited to learn from you, man. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Let's get into
It's a
it.
pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, of course. So I kind of just want to learn from you and where it all started. Like, what was life like growing up for you? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Sidney, Nebraska, home of Cabela's. So it's kind of
Okay.
a business town and trapped in a population of 8,000. So I went to school at a young age and I was not a good student. I knew it was not for me.
Yeah.
And so with that, I kind of relayed into sports. I was a football and basketball guy, but I was always on the bench.
Mm.
And until I learned more later in my business and my life that I wasn't coachable. And discipline and being coachable are kind of hand in hand, and I was neither of those. So I knew probably freshman year in high school I was going to be a business owner, and I think everyone around me knew that too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's funny. That's a common trend I hear with a lot of people is uh, a lot of times you don't even choose entrepreneurship. Like a lot of people think, oh, I choose to be a business
yeah.
owner. And I think for a lot of business owners, we think it's the contrary. It's like, no, it kind of chose me. I knew I wasn't going to be good in school. I knew I don't take really good direction from people, so I'm not going to work for somebody else. So really, you're stuck with one alternative, which is to start a business.
100%. It's
Yeah.
usually the C students that are the business owners.
Yeah.
So I was definitely in that category,
Yeah.
and so that relayed into my following years after I graduated. It's pretty evident right away that owning a business was what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, did you try to go to school or did you just start a business?
Yeah, so I had a full ride to college. My family was pretty excited. They're like, "Oh yeah, he's going to make it through." I chose construction management. I don't even think I read the description on construction management. I just knew I wanted to be somewhere in that realm. I sat in class the first day, and they were given kind of an introduction of the course for the next 4 years. And I went to lunch, and I think I didn't take a single bite of my Subway sandwich. I think I just threw it in the trash. Got in my truck and drove home. Yeah.
Wow.
Before I drove home, though, I did have a full ride. It's the Susan Buffett Scholarship,
Okay.
which is Warren Buffett's wife who passed away.
Wow.
Super cool scholarship in Nebraska. And if you forfeit it soon enough, they'll give it away.
Mm.
And so I went into the office, and luckily they were able to give it away to someone that was actually going to use it. So that
Wow.
was super cool.
And how do you even get that scholarship? Is it just something you applied for and it's kind of a game of chance or?
Certainly not an academic scholarship.
Okay.
I'll tell you that. Yeah, you apply for it. You write a long essay, basically what you're going to do with it, why you deserve it. It's kind of a success story. Premeditated success story is what it is.
Yeah. Wow.
So
So I guess talk to me about you have a full ride scholarship to school, kind of like the dream for a lot of people.
yeah,
Um, you walk out. What's going on in your head? What's the game plan?
it was a little bit of a relief and a little bit of kind of, oh my gosh, I just did that. What am I going to do now? And that's where I really started to have to think about what I'm going to do because the future is up to me now. No one's come to save you at that point. In high school, you kind of feel like, you can get through it, stumble through your way. And as long as you make it to graduation, you're going to be good. And it's not that way when you get to college and adulthood.
Yeah. What did your parents say?
Oh, they were pissed. Yeah, they were pissed. They were kind of like, we kind of knew it was coming, but not the first day kind of deal.
Yeah.
I think they thought it was maybe a spontaneous decision
Mm.
when really I think going into that first day and leading up to that, I was not feeling it. I did not want to be there.
Yeah.
So I think they kind of felt that too. But yeah, they were happy. I'll tell you that from the
I'm
beginning.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure. So I'm guessing you walked out of there, didn't really know what you were going to do, but you knew this wasn't it. When did painting come to be? Did you work other jobs before that, or did you just get straight into what you do now?
Yeah, so it led to a project in high school. I lived in a small little farmhouse, and the landlord of that property would let me do little remodels to help my mother and I out with rent.
Mhm.
And so he gave me the opportunity to get a full month rent. It was $525 was our rent. So looking back at it, he got a pretty good deal for a free paint job on this exterior of his house.
Yeah.
He provided the paint and I had to do it. And I was doing it with a brush and a roller. And I think I was putting it on Snapchat or Instagram or something. And I had a buddy hit me up and he's like, "Hey, I'm going to come spray this for you." He was a painter in central Nebraska. And
Mm.
so he had been doing well and he had only been doing it for a few years. And I remember he showed up with a trailer. He even brought, his sprayer, his ladder, everything you can think of. And within 3 hours, he had that little house done. I'm like, man, that's pretty cool. So I always had that in the back of my mind. But I started actually a landscaping company first.
Really?
And because, when you start the semester in August, fall is coming. And
Mhm.
so I started fall cleanups. I posted them on Craigslist and I got calls right away. And people were, calling me and I would ask neighbors and stuff and do whatever I could do. I was not filled with very much knowledge on how to gain more business. So I was kind of taking whatever I could get at that point. And then winter hit. And then when, the calls quit coming in, leaves
Yeah.
quit falling. In Lincoln, where I lived at the time, there's a lot of mature trees.
Mm.
So a lot of cleanup going on. But
Mhm.
I I don't think painting I chose painting. I think it chose me. I
Yeah.
think it did. I think just all those skills I had learned along the way. I loved working my hands growing up,
Yeah.
but I love the people aspect more.
Yeah.
And so that kind of led me to just sit down and make a decision because with that landscaping business I started, I lost my truck within 3 months after that.
Mhm.
I almost lost my home and I was living in a little rental house, so it
Mhm.
wasn't anything elaborate, but I was not doing well. And
Mhm.
I was in a tough place mentally with what am I going to do? What can I be successful with year round? And for me, landscaping just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just a skill that I had along the way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a tough thing to deal with that first. I feel like every business owner has that point to where it's like, dang, should I just go work a job? Like, I don't know if this is going to pay the bills or if I'm going to eat dinner tomorrow.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, everybody goes through that struggle and it's a tough place to be, but it almost builds that callus that'll get you through the next 9 years you've had in business. You have to go through that struggle to endure all the other things that you're going to have to deal with as a
100%.
business owner.
And even after I started the painting company, which was TO Painting, it was on my initials up, so
Yeah.
even when I started that, I think 3 months after that, I was going and taking interviews for projects. For example, jobs, not projects, excuse me.
Mhm.
And for example, FedEx was one of them.
Wow.
I got the job. I went for one day and I was carrying mini fridges up
Seems like
flights of
that's a
stairs.
common occurrence.
Yeah, I went for
one day.
yeah, literally one day. And I was like, this isn't for me.
Yeah.
And my biggest thing is I don't like wasting people's time. And I certainly don't like wasting mine.
Yeah.
So, I was the youngest child of three as well, too. So I kind of watched my older siblings and, they expressed a lot of regret of kind of wasting some time doing things they didn't want to do.
Mm.
So I knew right away if I didn't want to do something. Rather than having it be a spontaneous decision, it was more instilled like gut feeling, So, I definitely got some interviews and got the jobs on everyone, but there was only one I took, and that was that FedEx job, and
Yeah.
quit the first day. And it just reminded me that I want to start a business. This is where I belong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my other guests, Jacob, he talked about just the ability to make decisions quickly is super important in business. And I notice it
Yeah.
with myself. Like for me, even when I'm ordering a coffee, like if I go to Starbucks or whatever, I just look at the screen or whatever it is and I decide what I want to order. It doesn't take a lot of thought process for me. And I think as a business owner, especially somebody that wants to scale a business, you have to be able to think quickly. You can't sit there and, oh, what am I going to do? Or work there for 4 weeks when you know you probably don't want to be there, but you're weighing out all the options. I think it's really important to just be able to decide.
You just got to do it.
Yeah.
That drink that you order, your coffee, it may not be the best coffee on the menu, but you made the decision and you're out the door. And for me, that was kind of the whole process behind that
Yeah.
mindset is it may not have been the best, job opportunity with going to FedEx or, going to an implement store down the road, but I knew walking into there, yep, this isn't for me. I would walk in an interview and
Yeah.
that kind of led into making decisions with my business and just kind of going after it rather than sitting behind waiting for that perfect opportunity. You kind of have to create it yourself.
Yeah, I
So,
agree. So talk to me about those that first year, the first 2 years for TO painting. What did that look like?
It was rough. I'll just put it that way. Yeah, it was rough. I didn't know much about painting.
Okay.
I was constantly educating myself, which was not something I did when I was younger in school. And so I would learn from my mistakes though, and not always, but as a whole, I would slowly learn along the way that this was not the right way to go about this. For example, I would do a house, paint a house, and wouldn't look the greatest,
Mm,
and the client wouldn't be happy. But all I knew is I wasn't going to quit, and
mm,
I felt that it was an injustice to to quit on myself, let alone quit on the client. So I did whatever it took. I would go into Sherwin Williams or wherever and ask some really dumb questions. At the time, I was really insecure about looking like I didn't know what I was doing to the people that were selling me the products or kind of guiding me a little bit. So it was a rough journey, but it's kind of what made the whole journey worth it. Is I started to see a little bit of what works and what doesn't, and that's where I started to get into my different types of marketing or lead generation, as you can put it.
yeah. How were you getting those first jobs?
So it was Craigslist again. I
Okay.
would go. I went to back old faithful, dude. I went to
Yeah.
Craigslist, and I was just going on Canva, I think, and making some really generic ads. I think I used my rental house as one of my first projects, and I was kind of just doing stuff along the way with the old landscaping company. For example, I'd power wash a deck if they're a
Mm,
deck, and I would do it for free just so I could get the content or get the experience. And so I started with Craigslist, but that didn't last long. It fizzled out. And so that's when I started to really realize what worked and what didn't work.
yeah. And like at this point in time, are you still doing work
I was
yourself?
doing all of it.
You're doing
I
everything.
was doing everything.
Just you. Did you have like a buddy helping you out, or did you hire anybody else, or you're just painting this entire house by yourself?
I was hiring friends and cousins, and they'd
Okay.
leave because I would some jobs that they were vacant. You had to work through the evening, and I had several projects where I'd be working, and they didn't really know what they were doing. They were
Yeah.
just trying to help me and make some side cash. And it's nothing against them, but they'd call me and say, from the bathroom, "I'm leaving, man.
Uh,
I'm tired." I'm like, "Leave. I don't blame you. You're
yeah.
good." So it was just me up to that point.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And I guess at what point in time was there a shift? Because I feel like everybody that has some level of success in business, there's that moment in time where something changes, whether it's a mental shift or you're talking to somebody and something just clicks for you. I guess when was that shift for you where it's like, actually, I'm not struggling anymore. This can be profitable.
Yeah, there's a few things. It's the I was starting to get more work, but I was noticing a trend with relationships. It was no longer about being the best painter because I was certainly not the best painter.
Mm,
It was about I was learning about the importance of relationships, about how important it is to grow relationships. As that first year and a half to 2 years was certainly my biggest learning curve. My most setbacks I had just because I was an arrogant, young, uncoachable kid. That was not disciplined.
yeah.
So I really learned the importance of people don't want to buy. They're not looking for the best painter. They want to hire the person,
Mm,
and they want to make sure that you're going to be transparent, reliable, consistent. And tell them, hey, this is going to be a problem if I do this. And before I was kind of setting the bar really high
yeah.
and coming in really low. So when I realized that, it was definitely the biggest curve.
Yeah.
And then it became a part where once I learned that and I found a strategy that worked to gain the business, I couldn't do it all myself. I was doing injustice to myself and my clients by doing it all myself. And I'm a true believer that if you work in the business all the time, it's hard to work on the business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's that's a really good lesson that I think a lot of people need to learn. A couple things from that. Yeah, as a business owner, I think it's really important to be able to focus on what your skill sets are. And, you know, clearly your skill set wasn't painting. It's not, you weren't ever going to be the best painter in the world. And so for you to just focus on just painting, I think you were doing your business an injustice and yourself an injustice.
Oh, yeah.
And when you can realize, like, hey, my strong suit isn't painting, my strong suit is relationships. And if people can believe in me, maybe not TO painting, but want to work with Taylor, um, I can really grow this and I can have somebody else do the work.
I came with a hard lesson. I would come home after, I was starting to gain uh, these characteristics of growing relationships, and I would do a bad job or not up to my standard or what I knew was a good job.
Mhm.
And I'd take pictures of all my stuff. And I'm like, I'm selling the company. I'm going to go into business. This isn't for me. Until I realized, wow, there's dudes out there that are good at what I'm not,
Yeah.
and I'm good at what they're not. And what they don't enjoy, I enjoy. And so you got to find something you love. I still to this day absolutely don't love painting. It's not
Mhm.
like I do it for enjoyment, but I found something I love, and that's the people aspect.
Yeah.
And for me, once I realized that, I took off with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk to me about that. What did that look like for you? You had this mental shift. You're like, okay, I can't be doing the painting anymore. Um, this is in what year? Year two, year
This
three?
would be going into year 3.
Okay.
Like, this is where I'm just starting to get a little bit of consistency, not a lot,
Yeah.
but I was starting to realize, okay, something's working. Now I just have to figure out what.
Yeah.
And that became the relationships aspect rather than trying to do ads. I was trying to do the Craigslist ads. It wasn't sustainable for growth. And I never have ran an actual ad, like a legitimate ad. Still to this day, I never have.
Wow.
And so it was all about what works and how do I figure this out? And that became getting in front of people.
Hmm.
It's really hard online to show you're the best, not only doing the job, but as a integrity aspect.
Yeah.
And I always have had a lot of integrity with my business. From the beginning, I've had a good track record because I refuse to quit on people.
Mm.
Either that's the clients or my guys. And so that kind of relayed into the success leading forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you can have a lot of short-term success in business when you're not the most integral company. I've seen a lot of companies do it because they can cut costs and they can do all these things and they can make projects extremely profitable because they're not what's going to do in the homeowner's best interest. That's short-term profitability. But
100%.
if you're willing to sacrifice the cost and go back there 5, 7 times to make that homeowner happy, that job probably isn't profitable. You're probably losing money on that project, but long term, it's going to take your company so much further.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree with that. And a great example for me is I was, even from the beginning, I was never the cheapest guy. I wasn't always the most expensive guy, but I was never the cheapest. So I wasn't always trying to cut corners in order to get jobs because I think that's a domino effect in business. I think
Yeah.
that's where a lot of businesses that grow big quick
Yeah.
fail is they really cut corners, and sooner or later, you have 100 people mad at you,
Yeah.
and they're not going to hire you anymore.
Yeah.
And so moving into the future, I always knew you have to do your good by your people,
Mm.
and that's going to help me. And that's kind of what was the delayed aspect of success for me, but now it's kind of played out tenfold. And a lot of experiences I've had where I think I lost money, a lot of money on some jobs, but I learned so much.
Yeah.
Not only did I do a good job for the client and they referred me, that was a great aspect, but I think the on the different note, I learned a lot about the experience of that project. Either it was, fixing something that was wrong, or, learning a new trade, which wasn't something that I really wanted to do. I was kind of stuck to painting. So, yeah, there's a lot that goes into creating a business that's going to succeed over time rather than the short term, because I
Yeah.
think that's really easy to do.
Yeah.
And it to us, it's really easy to do if you're not willing to have integrity.
Yeah. You seem like a guy that's okay with failure. Like not failure in the sense that like your business is going to go under or you're going to go bankrupt or obviously nobody wants that,
Yeah.
but you're okay with kind of getting your face kicked in a little bit and learning from it.
Yeah, I firmly believe you only fail when you give up.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I've never done. I've came close a few times. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Like the Facebook post, I almost posted my stuff on Facebook, ready to sell every tool I had.
Wow.
But really came down to I got this far. If I quit now, I got to restart something else. And I think that's where a lot of people do, especially at a young age. They jump back and forth to stuff, trying to find that perfect thing. And painting was never the perfect plan for me.
Yeah.
But I stay consistent. I was willing to not be successful, but learn. And so I could start something else. But then I started to become successful with the painting. So for me, it was never an aspect of getting rich, right off or getting money right off the bat. That's a result.
Yeah.
It was more so learning a skill set that I could carry with. And the skill set was not only just the trade, but it was the people aspect.
Mm-hmm. So talk to me about after that breakthrough, year three, Because now, I talked to you today, you're working on a government contract,
Yep.
Estes Park, and I know you've done over 100 gas stations and you've done some really, really cool projects that a lot of painters probably would have dreamed to land. How did you go from running that paintbrush up and down people's houses by yourself to doing stuff like this?
It started with finding guys that are really good at what I'm not good at doing.
Yeah.
So the first thing I did was I found crews. And I'm an extrovert, I'm also an introvert, I like to be I like to work alone, from home and do those things, but I like to be in public and speaking to people, I'll talk to a guy at a gas station if I see paint on his pants or at Home Depot or wherever. So as I would go around town, I would find guys and I would also cold call them. And that's how I got into the shift is
Mm,
I was trying all sorts of techniques for marketing and not a lot was working. And so I figured out, well, I'm really good at calling people and I enjoy doing it. Why
yeah.
don't I start doing that? So I made a script and it was, hi, my name's Taylor O'Connell. I own TO Painting here in Lincoln. If you need a reliable painter, I'd love to help you out, Dan. Let's say their name's Dan.
Yeah.
And I think the first 10 people laughed at the call and hung up. But then I'm like, all right, I got to figure out more about their business.
Yeah.
And so I'd call them and figure out exactly what kind of business they do, what
Mm,
their name is. Some of these calls I made from the beginning, I didn't know their first name.
mm,
So it was an unauthentic approach. So before I would make these calls, I would look into their business, find out what they're good at, if they even qualify for being a good fit for my company,
mm,
and I would call them. And so that helped me not only find business, but it helped me get the guys to do the business.
mm.
And I also found some other guys through, you know, being in person and Home Depot. I'd see
Yeah.
a guy with paint on his pants and hey, are you a painter, man?
Yeah.
Well, I'm Taylor. Nice to meet you. I'd love to work with you. So that led to our first big contract, that approach.
Yeah.
And then from there, I just duplicated that process over and over and over. And then, I modified a little bit as I would realize, wow, okay, this is not starting to work. I need to get more authentic. And once I got more authentic with the personal approach, and that was to figuring out it's not all about me. I
Mm,
can't just sit here and talk about all about me when I'm meeting these people. I've got to figure out what do their kids do for fun? What do they do for fun? And once I got that approach, that's how I was able to really use my skill set on the phone to get them in person. I don't like lunch. I think it's weird. It's like intimate. I've
mhm.
never been a lunch guy. I'm a coffee guy.
Yeah.
I'm more so an energy drink guy, but
Yeah.
it goes hand in hand if you go the right place.
Yeah.
So I would sit them down and I would just ask them all about themselves.
Yeah.
I would do that with the subcontractors, and I would also do that with
Mm,
the businesses I would basically be interviewing for myself.
yeah.
And by the end of it, it became a relationship growth. And it wasn't that they were buying my paint jobs from me, or excuse me, hiring me for paint jobs. They were hiring me because they liked me.
Yeah.
And I was not always the most qualified guy, I'll tell you that, or had the biggest company, but they knew that I wasn't gonna give up. I was gonna be honest about every problem, every, mistake I made along the way.
Yeah.
And that's where the tumble effect of how we got here really started.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think people underestimate that portion of business where, yeah, people buy you. You know,
100%.
they're not buying the company. And I know personally, I've done a lot of business with people, not because of their resume or not because of, all the jobs they've done or their Google reviews. I've done business with people because I can sit across from them and get to know them. And I know that if this person messes up on the project, that they're going to take care of it because I just believe in the individual.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's cool you caught on to that early.
Yeah, and you've got to qualify them just as much as they qualify you.
Mm,
And I think that's what I realized after a few of these experiences with sitting people down is I'd walk away thinking, you know, this guy doesn't have anything to offer me, but I have something to offer him.
mm,
So it was not just a what does this person have to offer me, but what do I have to offer them? Because there was a lot of people that I'd sit down with, and I may have been doing more than they were, but I figured this guy's got it together. He at some point is going to be, in the position where I am, if not farther, because he has all those good traits. And so I never, disqualified someone unless I just thought their integrity wasn't there.
yeah.
So it was a different approach of how can this person be involved in my business and my life? And that's where I got into the the gas stations in the commercial realm because I was mainly residential up to that point.
Yeah.
I was too scared to get into commercial because it's a scary thing for people that have never done it before, and
Yeah.
so that's what led us to our growth, like statewide, multiple states.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily painting homes. I think that's great if you want to stay in that area, but I was a single young guy at the time in my early 20s, and so I was willing to hit the road and travel.
Cool.
Yeah.
You talked to me earlier about kind of mastering subcontracting. And I know for me, I've fired quite a few subcontractors in my time. How how have you handled that? Because I feel like subcontracting is a double-edged sword. It can, help you expand your business very, very quickly. It can be very scalable, but it can also really hurt your business. And so how did you find good subcontractors? How did you qualify them? And how did you ultimately find if they were the right fit for what you were doing?
It's an art of people. I realized they've got to know how to do the job. That's
Mm,
obvious. If they're a really good guy, but they're messing every job up. Sorry, dude. I really like you, but it's not going to work. So what I would do is I would qualify them and I would ask them. This is something that I don't think a lot of people do. It's pretty common sense, but I don't think a lot of people realize to do it. Is I would ask them, "What do you like to do?
mm,
In painting, what is your strong suit?" And if they told me, "Oh, I'm a great interior painter," I was not calling them for exterior paint jobs
mm,
because I knew not only would they match my, the price I had given them, but they also wouldn't do a good job. They wouldn't enjoy it.
mm,
And I also got to learn more about them. Again, I would ask them about themselves, about their family. I became friends with them.
mm,
It wasn't always, hanging out on a Friday going and getting dinner, but it was a relationship aspect to where if they did me wrong, it was personal. It was like, man, why are you doing this to me? We really get along. I expected more from you. And that I think turns people's gears more than just being transactional. I think when you're transactional, it becomes very unauthentic. And so I tried to make it as authentic as I could. And it just became a sense of I like them as a person and I really like what they do. Where is your strong suit and what don't you like to do? And also you can't find people that want to be a business owner and be the face of the business, do the things that you're doing
mhm,
because you're going to be clashing. They're going to be handing business cards out behind your back.
mhm.
You got to find people that are willing to not spread their own name and be loyal. And I've been very grateful to find guys like that. And I've had a few that not do that, but they don't get the job that this is their last job.
Yeah.
And so you gotta learn as you go too with these guys. If they do that, don't hire them again.
Yeah.
Find guy because there's a lot of good people out there. You just gotta find them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you can get really content with, you know, that. And so you got to cut it off quickly if you figure out they're not the right fit for you.
100%. In my earlier days, I was getting content with a few
Mm,
guys, and it was just kind of a domino effect of not doing a good job. I,
yeah.
I really liked them as guys, but they just weren't doing a good job for me. So I constantly had to go find new crews, and I came to a point where I was having 2 crews behind him. If they messed up, I would tell him, "Man, I'm on a tight deadline. I've got a high standard on this project.
Mm,
Sorry, dude, it's not gonna work out. Like this is your last day on this project." And the next day I would have another crew sit in. And that's tough. I don't like that approach, but you've got to get stuff done. Haven't done that a lot. I've been grateful to find good people that don't quit on me. I've only had one crew quit on me or had to
wow.
fire one crew the entire time. And some crews I've never called back after a project, but in the midst of a project, I've only had one crew fail on me one time.
That's awesome. And to be able to do that, I feel like your processes on the front end just have to be really dialed in. And it seems like you ask the right questions and you just really get to know the individual, not on a work basis, but you figure out what do they like to do on the job and outside of the job as well.
Yeah, what kind of person are they when they leave the job?
Mm,
And construction's weird, dude, because you know this. You either have your clean cut guys, they like to work out and, or you have your guys that they're getting drunk on a Tuesday after work. And I'm not against that. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But for me, that approach just was tough because you'd have, guys not show up and you wonder, where are they? So I would figure out from the bat, what kind of person are they? What are they doing after work? And, I'd meet some guys and after the job, I'd just say, it was great to meet you. And I wouldn't call them back.
yeah.
I wouldn't tear into them because, everyone has their own journey. But
Yeah.
for me, it was getting all the problems out before they are shown on the jobs.
Yeah, that's awesome. Talk to me about like federal contracts and some of the like bigger stuff you've gotten. Um, because it's one thing to sit in a room with a homeowner and talk about painting their house.
Yeah.
It's another thing to talk to somebody about painting 130 something gas stations. So talk to me about what that process was like sitting in a room from probably somebody quite a bit older than you, and being able to have that confidence to land those larger projects.
Yeah, really, once you figure out the process, it's easier than residential projects for me because you can get a relationship with one guy and work with him 100 times. And for me, I was really into that. I really from my first big contracts that I had where I took off doing gas stations and hotels and things like that, it was mainly through a few people. Instead of trying to convince 40 people to trust me and what I have to say and my integrity, who I am, I had to convince one guy or two guys, maybe 10, however many I wanted to expand to. So for me, it was appealing because I could really get to know this person. The first job, I would always like to start out with something that I knew where I could succeed. I think as you grow, you can't, dive in too deep. I think if you dive in without holding, taking a good breath, you're going to sink to the bottom pretty quick.
Mm,
And so for me, it was a simple approach, but a yet creative one because I would start with small jobs. And so the first gas station I ever did was the smallest one of all of them. The first federal job I ever did was it was 4 doors up in Rocky Mountain National Park, and now we're doing multi-unit construction, new construction projects, and commercial buildings and historical projects up there. So
cool.
it's kind of getting your feet wet because you got to prove to people what you're all about, what kind of work you do, if you're even worth hiring. Because there's nothing worse than being in a big job and you underquoted yourself, you're cutting corners, everyone's mad. You're mad, they're mad.
Yeah.
You can't please anybody and that's not a good process for success.
Yeah.
And so taking that approach with, okay, I can meet 4 guys that like me. I do a good job. They like that. I make their life easier. And I viewed it as I'd rather help one guy with 100 jobs, make his life easier than try to convince, like I said, 40 homeowners. And for me, it was a hard process at a young age because you walk into someone's home and they're like, "All right, this young kid, if he's doing it, I can do it too." And I had a lot of husbands step in and be like, I think I'll end up doing it myself.
Yeah.
And so I was okay with that, but it was a learning curve because I had to realize where am I going to take this? You have to start somewhere, and I started in residential.
Yeah.
But once I learned that relationship aspect of growing through doing a good job that first time, it'll just be a domino effect. And for me, that's what it was. And federal contracts, they're interesting. They are very difficult to get into.
Mm,
And if you're inexperienced, I would not do it. Not only will they not qualify you for it, but you're going to get in waters that you don't realize.
mm,
I've had a lot of calls um, from homeowners. Let's say they, scrape a door and they're, "Hey, Taylor, can you come touch up this, door I scraped?" And I always do it. If it's reasonable, I'll go do it. But with federal jobs, they can make you repaint a whole building again
mm.
and that's 10 months later down the road. So you really have to get um, organized, creative, and then, a good plan in place before you start the project. And that's not something I was always great at before. I was kind of just jumping into a project, hoping for the best. And although I had a game plan, it wasn't always the correct one,
Yeah.
So
And I'm sure you have to bid it properly because when you make a mistake on a, single family, 2,000 square foot home, you can eat that mistake. But when you make a mistake on a federal contract or a extremely large building, it's like, okay, now things have to be really, really dialed in and my pricing has to be really dialed in. And I've seen a lot of people want to reach for the stars a little too quickly, like you said.
you know,
And I think, like you said, it can be good and bad. When you're working with homeowners, people think it's harder to get larger projects a lot of the time, but sometimes it is harder working with a husband and a wife. They're going to have a lot more requests for you, even though the price tag on it is much less. Where when you're working with a large contractor, You just kind of have to make it make sense for them, and they're not going to have all those little requests that maybe, you know, Susan and Dave do.
Yeah, 100%. I like to say if, some residential projects turn into, I should be a therapist, a little bit. I should be a painter. Yeah, I'm a
Yeah.
cleaner. I'm a, everything, because people want you to go above and beyond for them. No matter if you're in commercial or residential, they want you to go above and beyond. But the residential projects are tough to grow in, multi-statewide or at a big scale, because you're having to make 100 people happy in
Mm,
their own certain way. And, although I say therapist and joke around like that, there's a lot of people that are going through things. Not every, as you know, in the business, not every transaction that they're doing is something they want to do.
yeah.
I've done a lot of work for real estate agents, and some of the homes were a death.
Yeah.
And so you're dealing with that client that's upset. You're kind of their knight in shining armor, getting them through the job so they can move a state, retire, go to a rest home, you name it. So for me, it was tough, to grow, and it's tough on you. And when you're battling all these different, things being thrown at you with the people aspect, you've got to figure out what works for your business. And I think that's where a lot of young guys struggle with growing, is they don't realize, all right, I'm really good at, you know, um, dealing with one person, but I'm not great at getting 40 people to convince, to be convinced that
Mm,
I'm worthy of their investment. So,
yeah. And you can be successful at either. You can be success. I see a lot of painting companies are very successful with door to door,
yep.
and that works for them. It's not a broken business model. You can be very successful with it. Um, but you found what works for you. You're better at working with individuals rather than 100 different people at the same time. And yeah, and you capitalized on it.
Yeah, I did door knocking. Speaking of that,
You did.
I
Okay.
door knocked for a week. Oh, I got up. I was ready to go. I think I bought a polo from Walmart, a black polo. I was dressed. I think it was 3 sizes too big. I was swimming in it, but I did door knocking. Did not go well.
Hmm.
It was not for me. And I did, handing out brochures at uh, events, home events
Hmm.
at the fairgrounds, things like that. And then I just really had to figure out what works for me. And I think behind every business, they're different because the management is different.
Hmm.
There's different characteristics of the people behind it. And you've got to find that, strong suit for that. And for me, it wasn't knocking doors. As I sit right here, I may not be the most intellectual person that you've had on here. I don't have the best speech. So I would get in front of them. I was nervous, I was nervous, and I couldn't really display
Hmm.
what we're all about in 15 seconds. I needed 30 minutes sit down one on one to figure that out. And it's pretty hard to do when you're door knocking.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was finding what worked for myself. And then that became, amplifying from there.
Yeah. Was age ever a hurdle for you? Did that ever become a mental struggle when you're, because so you started it at 18, you're starting to do large projects at 23, 24 years old. Um, was that ever a mental hurdle for you?
I think, and really till I found that curve of that people aspect and the growth, I used it as kind of a crutch. I was like, oh, people don't want to hire me because I'm young. I just wasn't authentic, dude.
Mm,
I wasn't being real with myself. I wasn't being real with people. I was trying to, play this persona that I've got it all figured out, and that wasn't the case until I kind of, put I guess it's an alter ego to the side that I don't have it all figured out, and realize people want to see authenticity.
mm.
And I looked really young. I still do. I'm 26 years old, and I look, I get a lot of people go, "Are you 20?" It's like, come on, dude. I'm not 20. I'm 26, man.
Yeah.
And so that was definitely a confidence thing, though, for me.
Yeah.
It was, and I think that's a lot of young guys that get into it. I've met a lot of young dudes that get into it, and they don't last long, and it's also because you have to build yourself.
Yeah.
And as I grew my business, I gained 80 pounds of, I'd like to say not all fat,
Yeah. You're pretty muscular.
Thanks,
Yeah.
man.
So,
Sorry,
yeah.
man. Thank you, thank you. But no, I would just, as I grew my confidence as a person, I grew my confidence physically, and that was by investing into myself
Mm,
on the back end when no one was looking. I wasn't golfing at on noon anymore. I was working out. I wanted to not only better my life, business wise, I wanted to better myself because I wasn't very confident when I looked in the mirror.
yeah. And I think a lot of people underestimate that. Like, you're not. born confident. I think you really have to build that belief in yourself. And you can get that belief from a lot of different places. You can get it from the gym. You can build it from just really knowing what you're talking about. You can get it from God. But you have to be able to build that belief in
Yeah.
yourself to build the confidence.
For me, that's a great point because for me, I was building confidence with my success, my physical. But until I would say the last 2 years, I didn't realize the confidence I need to build as a man
Mm,
and as a husband, as a business owner, as a leader. And so I decided I'm at a point where I can't do it all by myself.
mm,
I was listening to a podcast by Steve Weatherford when I was remodeling my house in the midst of all this business, growth. And I would isolate myself because it's hard to grow confidence. A lot of people are telling you, "Don't do this, do this." When you're getting success, it's very lonely because a lot of people they want to be happy for you until you do better, and it's kind of you know a double-edged sword a little bit because you want to lift them up, but they're also not lifting you up. So you have to kind of isolate yourself a little bit.
yeah.
And so for me, I found a great mentor, Steve Weatherford is, and at the time I didn't realize, how bad I needed this because I thought, I maybe needed a business coach, I maybe needed a physical coach, but the entire time I just needed a personal coach, a
Mm,
personal mentor for my development. And so within the last 6 months, I've actually joined an awesome group. If you haven't heard of Steve Weatherford, I highly recommend you look into him if you're a young man
cool.
because he'll help you grow as a man. And it was an investment. It wasn't free, and it was something that I've never done. I've always kind of learned it the hard way through myself, and until I got to a point where I'm like, I cannot do this anymore by myself because there's so much I lack as a person,
Mm,
as an individual rather than a business owner. And so getting that investment into yourself has amplified my business,
mm,
in the last 6 months, let alone um, the last 2 years I've been listening. I've been listening to him for about 3 years, excuse me. So
cool.
that really kind of helped set a guideline. And then I got to a point recently, I'm like, I need to get more out of myself because you're constantly always wanting to get more out of a business or your physical or whatever you're into. But sometimes you just need to take a look at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I I feel like a lot of people want to diagnose a business issue with like a business solution, but a lot of times the business issue is coming from a personal solution. And I feel like you diagnosed it and realized that, hey, I can't grow my business not because of marketing or whatever, but I just need to become a better leader, or a better man, or a better husband. And it sounds like that's really propelled your business.
Yeah. It's been something where I've always tried to reflect on what's not working. And, as you get a little bit of success under you, you think everything's working,
Mm,
and along the way, as you're continuing to grow, you've got to transform. And it became to a point where I was kind of feeling like I plateaued at a certain sense of my growth regarding, how many jobs I could get or, how many people I could talk to. And it came down to I'm not growing as a person. I'm just growing as an individual, as a business owner, and physical, and great things that come with success. But I really had to find that success within myself. And I think that people, if they're feeling like they're plateauing in their business, they need to take a look at themselves, especially at a young age, because you think you have it all figured out when you get successful young, especially if it happens within a few years. You're like, I've got it all figured out. And that comes about, something that you're going to become lackadaisical about over time. And so meeting my wife and moving was kind of that learning point for me, that learning curve. So it was something that I definitely didn't think I was, going to happen because I was so complacent with where I was at.
mm,
Although we were growing, I wasn't growing on the scale that I knew I could.
mhm. How would 18-year-old Taylor O'Connell define success, and how do you define success now?
18-year-old me would be like the nice truck, the house,
Yeah.
a beautiful wife, and a big wallet. And that's all that really would like be the four things for me. But now I want to be surrounded by people that I can take care of and I lead and that trust me and I trust them. And for me, it's no longer about, what does success bring me? What do I bring to success? What am I able to offer others that before I was just wanting something to be offered to me?
Mhm.
And so I would focus less on the, you know, the satisfaction of perfecting too. Wanted to perfect everything I did, and I've realized now that you've got to have your ducks in a row. But you've also got to realize that these learning lessons that are happening in your business in your life, learn from them. Once I learned from them, it amplified everything about my business. And I think that became a little bit of discipline, came into play a little bit.
Mhm.
I had to be more disciplined with making sure if I start a project and don't have my ducks in a row or don't check the box, I'm going to learn the hard way. But for me, I always chopped it up as a blessing. I don't have any regrets, zero, because that all helped me grow
Mm.
and learn. And I wouldn't be able to do the things I am now by, you know, for people or a project from the get go, than continuing to fail. Because I think that also is why businesses fail, especially at a young age or when they're young, when they're in that beginning process, is because people don't learn. They just continue those mistakes. And for me, I did that for a little bit until I almost lost everything.
Mm.
And I had to really, have a few late nights sitting there thinking, what am I doing wrong? What do I do differently? And that's where I became, so aware of just I've got to make a change with this, with that, and that growing that scale of growth comes with a a clarity of realizations what you're doing, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. When you look at your 9-year journey, um, what do you think got you through all of the ups and downs? Because it sounds like there's been a lot of them. Like, how did you endure 9 years of probably getting your face kicked in a little bit more than having those wins?
I think you've got to really build yourself up along the process. Family's going to build you up, friends will build you up, but at the end of the day, when everyone goes home, those doors shut, you're sitting there all by yourself, you realize no one's coming to save you. And for me, I had to figure out, am I gonna quit right now? I've already learned so much. And I still feel like that to this day. I don't feel like I want to quit or, you know, anything like I did when I first started. But those realizations are still there of, I've got to continue this.
Mhm.
Because that little success that you get should show you that something's working. Now I just have to figure out what it is.
Mhm.
And that's still to this day is as I continue to grow, I'm like, all right, what's working here? What didn't work? And so that approach is what's kept me going. And I also just have something in me. I think I don't know if it's stubbornness or something, but I refuse to give up. You got to kick me out of the door to get me out of the door because I won't give up. And that's something I struggled with growing up. I would give up something. I remember I ran track for a week and I gave up. I
Mhm.
didn't get the starting position and I gave up. In high school, I walked out of games. I
Mhm.
wouldn't play, couldn't figure out why I wasn't playing, and I would pack my bags and leave in the middle of the game. And so that mindset it's like self-sabotage basically. And
Yeah.
so you've got to build yourself up and realize no one's coming to save you.
Mhm.
If I quit right now, I have to start over something completely new. Yes, I have, skills that can go with it, but keep growing. You're going to get more skill along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too often people wanna rely on motivation. Like, they want to feel good
Yep.
and like, "Hey, if I feel good, I'm gonna do this," or if the situation is right, if I'm playing good, in this sport, or if I'm doing well in school, I'm gonna keep going. That's motivation. Where you really develop discipline, where it's like, regardless of how I feel, regardless of if I'm sick, regardless of if my car's broke down, crew quits on me, whatever the case is, I'm gonna do it because I'm disciplined. I'm not motivated. Motivation comes and goes. I wake up all the time unmotivated, but I'm disciplined. And I think that's important to have as a business owner.
Motivation to me is a feeling.
Yeah.
You watch a video and it's a motivational video, you're ready to run through a brick wall.
Yeah.
But that next morning, you're like reality sets in. And like you said, you wake up, you're unmotivated, but you have to remember your why. And that's
Mm.
what you stay disciplined to is your why. And one of my whys is I always wanted to provide a good life for myself, my kids, my wife. And I also wanted to have life on my terms. I thought owning a business, you'd be able to have more, you'd be able to show up to a project and you'd be off at noon golfing. No, it's not that. If you're in that position, your destruction's coming. And so for me, after learning that the hard way, I'm, investing back into myself, my business, and for me, that's a discipline. That's something that you can't get by motivation.
Mm.
You have to consistently do it, and the consistency is, I think, a strong suit with how I took this approach. Is if I wasn't consistent, if I took months off, if I had a rough winter and I took the spring off, I I'm gonna fail. I'm gonna lose everything I have.
Yeah.
And so I would, don't get me wrong, I would moan, I would cry about it, sometimes literally,
Yeah.
I remember early days I would sit there and cry in my truck. I'm like, why can't we figure this out? But it was because I was wanting this so bad.
Mm.
And it wasn't a sense of motivation. It was just a sense of, I need this. My future needs this. And my future relies on me. And that became, from a lifelong of quitting and being the kid at the end of the bench. One of my favorite stories I've told to a group of people was the kid at the end of the bench, and that mentality of, playing the victim in your life is going to destroy your entire future of success. And I was victimizing myself, at a younger age. When I started my business, I was like, oh, people don't want to hire me because I'm young. People don't want to hire me because I look, 15 when I was 18. No, it was because I wasn't authentic. I didn't be transparent with what I was about. I was setting the bar high and they knew it too. So I had to be realistic with myself,
Mm.
stay consistent, and then stick to the plan.
Yeah. And life's not fair. And I think when you can actually get a grip on that idea that life's not fair, um, nobody's coming to save you, is something you said earlier. Um, you can't choose what happens to you, but you can choose how you respond. And I think if you can really get a grip on that, you can really succeed in life.
Yeah, if you can realize that I don't have it the worst, I just have it pretty bad,
Yeah.
and you take the pill and you swallow it and you use it as motivation rather than a victimization, victimizing yourself, you will realize that, all right, this guy, I meet this guy and he doesn't have a great story either. But when you're authentic with people and you truly, express like, hey man, my childhood wasn't the greatest. I was bouncing from house to house. You may meet a guy who's got an even worse story, but you're able to realize, wow, look at this guy. He's grown so much as
Mhm.
an individual because of everything that's happened to him. Because I've met a lot of people in business that, bad things happen to everybody, but they really think they're the only one.
Yeah.
And I think you listen to a lot of the great success stories, you're like, how did this guy make it through? I mean, he's the only thing he was missing was a bullet hole in the side of his chest.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was kind of a sense of, it's everything but happens bad. Bad things happen to everybody. But if you can figure out the good in all of those bad things and turn it into a lesson on to to make you better, you can make everyone around you better through that, you
Yeah.
know?
I want to get into I've talked a lot about the growth of
Yeah.
your company, the struggles, the success. What does life look like for you now?
Yeah, it's great. I'm married to a beautiful lady, my wife Lauren, and she was a huge part of my success I have now. Is I did everything by myself, it felt like. Family was there for me, but to have someone at home when you go home after a long day and you don't feel worthy of, being in the position you're in or growing at the way you are, she reminds me, she'll look at me and she'll be like, "Really? You don't think you should be here? Like you got here all by yourself and this is just the beginning for you."
Yeah.
So not only was that support great, but having somebody that s- is not willing to ride the bus with you if you lose it all. And
Yeah.
she's incredible with that. When I met her, she didn't care about the success of my business. My business was going great. And to find someone that's truly authentic, and I think as you get more successful, that's a hard thing to do, is find people that are truly wanting to get to know you because of you rather than your success. So she was a huge part in that. And my life now is amazing. I moved to Oklahoma. My business was expanding down there, and this last year we bought our dream home and moved to Oklahoma, and that was an awesome, blessing in my life. And I don't think I could be here without her. She's a huge part of that. I think behind every strong man is even a stronger woman.
Mm,
And she sees me come home from a long day. I'll have tears in my eyes if I'll be full of anxiety, but to have someone that is able to calm you down and also with having someone like that, you've got to realize that when I come home like this, it's not fair to them.
mm,
So you've also got to have a balance with that. And I think that's where our relationship's very good, is where I realize, okay, I've got to cut this off. I've got to hang it up at the door. And so for me, that's very important. So my marriage has been very great for my life now and where I'm at. And we have kind of a vision board, and I prayed for an acre with a pool and a home I could remodel, and God delivered. And it was by just trusting the process. When I started the business, 9 years ago, almost a decade ago, I thought this would be a 2 to 3 year thing, and it was almost a decade. So you've got to trust the process, and that's something that I still am doing
mm.
as we continue to grow in other ventures as well, like we are right now. It's a constant reminder that it takes time. So I'm at a point where I realize how far we've came, but how much more there is to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that first and foremost. I always think that I couldn't be where I'm at today without my wife, directly and indirectly. Directly, like you said, just having somebody that believes in you is is so so important. Despite the money, if I lost it all today, I know my wife would ride through it with me. And I think just having somebody that believes in you just directly helps you so much. And then indirectly too, it helped me because it wasn't about me anymore. You can only do so much when you're working for you,
Yep.
but the second it's no longer about you, where, hey, I want to have a family, I want to have kids, I need to make this work because it's not just about me anymore. If it's just about me, if I fail and I have to start over, it is what it is. It's not ideal, but I can do it. But when you have somebody else that depends on you, I think it makes you work 1,000 times harder.
Yeah, up 6 years, it was all about my vision.
Yeah.
What did I want my life to look like? Then I met my wife. We moved to Colorado. I started my business completely over. And so that was a blessing, the biggest blessing, I would say, within this whole transformation of the last 9 years of my life, because I realized I don't know everything, but to have somebody by your side that's going to help you remind you what you do know was incredible. And so it's extremely important to choose a good spouse and your circle around you,
Yeah.
you know. And so for me, that was not always a strong suit, was finding people that are quality.
Yeah.
And so with growing success, especially at a young age, you've got to find people that are happy for you, see what you see in yourself, if not more, and remind you of those. And also find people that are doing better than you as well.
Yeah. Yeah. What is the next? Because you said there's a long way to go for your company. What does the next 3 to 5 years look like for you?
Yeah. All right. Well, I'd love to know that answer, but
Yeah.
where I want to go with it is the growth of our additional services. So during the growth of my business, I was strictly just painting until I realized, okay, I can control the quality of the drywall, of the framing, of these certain aspects that not only make my life easier, but the person I'm working with easier. And so our business is growing in that realm. And so we're planning on, continuing to add to that and to grow with quality. And so our business is definitely taking that route right now. We've gotten into, a lot of drywall, a lot of framing, things like that, that I definitely wasn't wanting to do from the beginning.
Yeah.
I just thought that, painting would be the only thing I need to do. But then I realized I can make the quality of this project not only go better for myself, but the
Mm.
the contractor I'm working with. If I can control the quality from the beginning,
Hmm.
and they got to deal with one guy. So after I realized that, that's kind of the approach I'm taking moving forward, is continuing to add to those services that we do.
Cool.
And I've got something up my sleeve that I won't necessarily say right now, but
Yeah.
we'll be getting into that here soon. So,
Yeah.
definitely, expanding, not staying complacent at all.
Cool.
That's not something I'm willing to do.
Yeah.
So,
And thinking about expanding to other states as well, you were talking about, right?
yeah, I want to stay with the specialty services. So, I'm mainly as we travel, we're not doing middle class or lower class residential projects, and not a lot of residential projects as we grow in other states. Yes, we do those in certain hubs, but we definitely don't grow with that approach. So we're doing more federal stuff, larger commercial projects in other cities and states that we continue to grow in. But
Yeah.
the approach of expanding our services is definitely what's going to help us with that
Mm.
approach too.
Well, Taylor, it's been phenomenal learning from you, man. You've got an incredible story, an incredible mindset, and yeah, just a really good guy. And I'm really excited to see where you take this company. Excited to just see all your personal growth as well as your growth in business. Um, I typically like to end this podcast by asking something along the lines of, what would you tell another young entrepreneur? But with you, I want to ask something a little bit different. If you could go back and tell something to 18-year-old Taylor, when you're driving out of college on the first day, what's that one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
That's a great question. So the biggest piece of advice I could give myself, 18-year-old me, is that everything is not going to go perfect. When you start a business, there is going to be learning lesson after learning lesson, especially in the first couple of years. I think that's the hardest point of a business. And that's why most businesses fail within 5 years, is because you try all these different approaches, but don't realize what works. So I would definitely tell my old self, figure out about myself. Quit trying to focus on being a business guy, being the best painter I know. Focus on being the best version of yourself. And if you do that and find out what you're good at, your business will succeed. It's just a matter of time. So I think that's something that if you're 18 years old wanting to start a business, you need to figure out what you're good at,
Mm.
because that's not something I did right away. I wanted to be this awesome painter that just, I was always covered in paint, but man, I could do the best job around, until I realized, I'm way better at talking with people and growing relationships. And so I will notice that guys out there are the opposite of that approach. They like to paint and don't like talking to people. And so finding what you're good at is so important with gain success, especially at a young age, because you'll bounce around realizing this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. Find something that works. And that's by looking into yourself and realizing I've got these great traits about myself, and these other traits may not be it. And so if you can amplify that and learn to move around that and not stay complacent with where you're at, and failure is going to come, so just get ready. And that's something I would tell myself again, is I tell myself that all the time, because still this day, you think you got it all figured out, as I'm sure you feel like sometimes too, is, oh, there's not going to be any more issues like that anymore. Then there are,
Mm.
and you didn't realize this certain thing about an aspect of a project or a person. And so you've got to realize that not everything is going to be perfect, but if you refuse to give up and you learn from that, it's going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal advice, Taylor. I appreciate having you on the podcast, man. Like I said, it's been incredible. And yeah, I look forward to just continuing to see your success.
Thank you, man. It was an honor being here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. This is one of the first times I've ever told my story publicly. So it's not the easiest thing to do, because still to this day, although I'm as transparent as I am, you still want to hide those learning curves, because people see it as weakness, and I don't think that way anymore. It's a strength. If you can learn from your mistakes, it's a strength. And so having you um, have this great podcast, I think it's incredible what you're doing for younger guys. And I think that a lot of guys need to realize that when you start a business, it's not going to be easy, and they won't know that unless they have platforms like this. So I appreciate you letting me come on and kind of telling a little bit about my story, and I hopes it helps the younger guys figure out, it's It's not all sunshine and rainbows, but if you stick with it, man, it's worth it. And so I appreciate you for having me on a lot.
Amen.
Yeah, it's been a
Amen.
pleasure.